Adama sat under the old mango tree, her back straight, eyes fixed on the torn pages of a schoolbook someone had once thrown away. The dirt beneath her was dry and cracked, just like her lips, but she didn't care. She read with hunger, not for food, but for knowledge. Her stomach growled, but her heart kept whispering, "Keep going, Adama." Behind her, the sharp voice of her stepmother, Chidea, cut through the still air. "Useless girl, always with your nose in paper. Go fetch water." Chidea never missed a chance to insult her. Since Adama's mother died giving birth to her, Chidea treated her like a burden, less than a servant, more like a ghost. No warm hug, no kind word, just orders and curses. But Adama didn't stop reading. Every sentence was a rope pulling her closer to a life beyond Mbeko, a life where girls had choices. She wanted to become someone who mattered, someone free. Meanwhile, the village buzzed with strange news. Chief Baraka, the rich and powerful man from the neighboring town, had sent out word. He was searching for a young, obedient wife. The elders whispered. Mothers fixed their daughters' hair tighter. Girls were told to behave, to smile, to stay clean. Adama heard it too, but she didn't think it had anything to do with her. She was just the quiet girl with hunger in her eyes and a book in her hand. She didn't know that her whole world was about to change. One early morning, Chidea stood by the doorway, her eyes cold but shining with something else. Greed. She watched Adama quietly sweeping the yard, her skinny hands moving like she carried the weight of the whole world. That's when Chidea made a decision. Not out of love, not even out of duty, just pure selfishness. She saw a chance to trade the girl for something better than peace. Gold. That afternoon, Chidea pulled out a box of old beads and a faded dress with shiny sequins. "Put this on," she said sharply. Adama looked confused but obeyed. "Why?" she asked softly. "Because," Chidea snapped, "you're going to see the chief. He wants to help smart girls like you. He might even send you to school." Adama's heart fluttered with hope. Later that night, Chidea sat with her husband, Adama's father, and told the lie with a straight face. Chief Baraka heard about Adama's good grades. He wants to sponsor her education in the city. Imagine, our daughter going to school with rich people. The tired man's eyes filled with quiet pride. He had nothing to offer his daughter but hope. "God is good," he whispered, believing every word. What he didn't know was that earlier that day, Chidea had already accepted 2 heavy bags of gold from the chief's guards. She took the money with steady hands and no shame. Not once did she think of what it would do to Adama. Not once did she care. That night, while Adama packed the only dress she owned and a broken pencil, she dreamed of books, buses, and bright classrooms. She smiled in the dark. "Maybe this is my chance," she whispered to herself. But across the house, Chidea counted coins by candlelight. Her smile was wider. To her, Adama wasn't a girl with dreams. She was a ticket, a transaction, a body she never loved, traded for shiny promises. And as the stars blinked silently above the village of Mbeko, one girl was dreaming of freedom, while another woman had already sold it away. The moment Adama stepped into Chief Baraka's mansion, something felt wrong. The gates were too tall, the guards too serious, and the silence too heavy. She held tight to her small bag, expecting someone to show her to a school, or maybe hand her books. But instead, she was led into a room full of women whispering and staring at her dress, her face, her quiet eyes. Then came the truth, like a slap. "You are now the chief's bride," said one of the older women, tightening gold bangles around Adama's wrist. "This marriage is already blessed by tradition. You should be proud." Adama froze. "No," she whispered. "There's a mistake. I came here for school, for education. Please." But no one listened. Her words hit walls and bounced back empty. Her voice didn't matter here. The next day, she was forced into a silk dress, thick with embroidery, too heavy for her thin frame. They painted her face and pushed her into a room where Chief Baraka sat like a king, smiling like he owned her. The room was full of food and music, but her heart was drowning in silence. No one could see her pain under the layers of silk. Days passed, then weeks. The big mansion turned into a golden prison. She wasn't allowed to leave. She wasn't allowed to write. Even her questions were treated like insults. Every why and when can I go home was met with cold eyes and tighter rules. She slept in a bed that wasn't hers, ate food she didn't taste, and woke up every day feeling smaller. Her dreams began to fade like old ink on paper. The books she once loved were replaced with locked doors and empty stares. No laughter, no learning, just silence. Sometimes she would stand by the window and watch the world outside. Birds flying freely, children running in the dirt, girls carrying books to school. Her heart ached. That should have been me. She was a child trapped in silk, dressed like a bride, treated like property. And though her body was in the mansion, her soul kept whispering, "This is not where I belong." But no one heard her. Not yet. One afternoon, Adama sat alone in the garden behind the chief's mansion, her knees pulled to her chest, tears rolling down her face. She thought no one could see her pain. No one ever had. But someone was watching, quietly, gently, from the shadows. Sefu, the mute servant boy, was sweeping the walkway nearby. He was always silent, always moving quickly, with his eyes lowered. No one paid attention to him, and that's why he saw everything. Every tear Adama cried, every time she flinched when someone called her wife, every look of fear that passed through her eyes when the doors closed behind her. He didn't have words, but he had kindness. That night, while the others slept, he crept into the kitchen and wrapped a piece of flatbread in a napkin. Inside it, he placed a small pencil stub and 2 folded sheets of paper. Then, he left it outside Adama's door, gently knocking, before running off into the darkness. At first, Adama didn't know who it was from, but when it happened again the next night, this time with a thin book hidden beneath some fruit, she understood. She saw him in the garden again the next day and looked into his eyes. He didn't speak. He just pressed his hand over his heart, then pointed to her. She began writing, quietly, carefully. In the dead of night, she filled the pages with the truth about how she was tricked, how she was sold, how her dreams were crushed in a house that looked like a palace but felt like a cage. Sefu started sneaking more paper, more pencils, even a small flashlight. They never spoke, but somehow their silence was louder than the chief's power. In a world that had taken everything from Adama, her voice, her choice, her freedom, Sefu gave her one small gift, the chance to be heard. He had no idea that his small, quiet act would be the first spark, that her words, written in the dark, would one day light a fire so big it would reach beyond the gates of the mansion, past the village, and into the hearts of a whole nation. But for now, it was just 2 broken souls sharing hope in secret. One quiet morning, Adama sat near the garden with a pencil in her hand and a heart full of pain. She had written so many pages over the past few weeks, pages full of truth, fear, and hope. She wrote about the day she was tricked, the lies Chidea told, the gold that bought her, and the silence that stole her freedom. Every word was a cry for help. She looked at the stack of papers and knew it was time. Someone out there needs to read this, she whispered to herself. Someone needs to know. That night, Sefu slipped into the kitchen as usual, but this time, Adama handed him a small bundle wrapped tightly in cloth. He raised his eyebrows, unsure. She placed her hands together like she was praying and nodded slowly. He understood. The next morning, Sefu tucked the bundle inside a loaf of bread and placed it into a basket headed for Mbeko village. It was market day, and no one checked the bread. It was just food to them. But inside, it carried Adama's entire truth. At the village market, a young woman named Amani was visiting for her cousin's wedding. She was a journalist from the city, curious and always alert. She bought the bread from a stall and sat under a tree to eat. But when she broke the loaf open, something fell out. Folded papers, worn but carefully written. She read the first few lines, and her hands started to shake. Her eyes filled with tears. It was raw, real, powerful. "My name is Adama," the letter began, "and I was sold." Amani didn't wait. She took photos of every page and posted them online with one sentence. "This girl's story needs to be heard." Within hours, it was everywhere. People from across the country were reading Adama's words, crying, sharing, shouting. The hashtags #Save Adama and Mbeko Bride began trending. What began as a hidden letter in a loaf of bread had become a spark, and now the fire was spreading. In a mansion far away, Adama sat by the window, unaware of the storm rising outside. But her heart felt different, like the wind had started to change. Something was coming. She could feel it. As soon as Amani's post went live, the whole country woke up to Adama's story. Hashtags like Save Adama and Mbeko Bride began to spread like wildfire across social media. People shared the letter, adding their voices to the outrage. Women, men, young and old, everyone was talking about the girl who was sold for gold and trapped in silence. Messages poured in from every corner. Some were angry, some were crying, but all demanded justice. The story wasn't just about one girl anymore. It was about every child forced into a life they never chose. Within days, news outlets picked up the story. Television stations ran special reports. Radio shows debated child marriage laws. Newspapers printed her letter in bold headlines. The country's attention was locked on Mbeko and Chief Baraka's mansion. Then, something powerful happened. NGOs, groups fighting for children's rights and women's freedom, sent teams to Mbeko. Cameras and microphones followed them as they marched to the chief's gate. Reporters shouted questions, demanding answers. Villagers gathered, some scared, others hopeful. The government could no longer ignore the outrage. Authorities arrived with police officers and arrested Chief Baraka on charges of illegal forced marriage, child abuse, and human trafficking. The man who once ruled the village with fear was now handcuffed and taken away. Chidea's name also started to surface. People began asking how a poor girl like Adama could end up married to the chief. Slowly, the ugly truth behind the gold bags came to light. Adama, still locked inside the mansion, heard the noise outside, the shouting crowds, the flashing lights. For the first time in weeks, a small spark of hope grew inside her. She knew that her story was no longer hers alone. It was a battle cry, echoing across the nation. The internet storm had done something impossible. It had pulled back the curtain on years of silence and hidden pain. And as the sun set over Mbeko, the world was watching. The fight for Adama's freedom was just beginning, but now there was no turning back. The truth that had been buried for so long finally came crashing down like a storm. The bags of gold, heavy and shining, were traced back to Chidea. It was her greed that had started it all, her lies that had sold Adama like a piece of property. The village was stunned. The woman who had cursed and ignored Adama was no longer untouchable. One morning, the village woke up to the sound of footsteps and shouting. Chidea was being led away in handcuffs, her face pale with shock. Her husband, Adama's father, stood at the gate, tears streaming down his weathered cheeks. He had loved his daughter quietly, but now, the pain of betrayal was written all over his face. He watched helplessly as the woman he married, the mother who had hurt his child, was taken away. "Why, Chidea?" he whispered, but she had no answers, only silence. The village elders, once silent witnesses to the injustice, stepped forward. They gathered the people in the center of the village, where everyone could hear. With heavy hearts, they spoke. "We were wrong," the oldest elder said, his voice shaking. "We did not protect Adama. We allowed her to be treated like this. For that, we are sorry." They promised the village and the world that Adama's story would not be forgotten. It would be taught in schools, so no child would suffer as she did. Her name would become a symbol of courage and change. The villagers looked at Adama's small, empty home and felt a mix of shame and hope. For years they had turned their heads, but now they faced the truth. In that moment, the masks of silence and fear fell away. The village saw clearly who had caused pain and who had survived it. And as Chidea was taken further away, the people of Mbeko made a silent promise to stand with the voices that had been silenced and to fight for a future where no girl would be sold for gold again. Adama's story had changed everything. No one in Mbeko expected what happened next. Sefu, the quiet boy who had never spoken a single word, suddenly found his voice. It was during a live television interview, just days after Chief Baraka's arrest, when the cameras were rolling and millions of people were watching. The interviewer looked at Sefu kindly and asked, "You've been silent all these years. What made you speak now?" Sefu took a deep breath. For the first time, his voice was heard, not just by the people in the studio, but by the whole country. "She gave me a voice," he said softly, his eyes steady. "Adama showed me how powerful words can be. I couldn't speak before, but when I helped her write her story, I found my own voice inside." He paused, then smiled gently. "She was trapped and afraid. I wanted to give her freedom, the freedom to tell the truth." His simple words carried so much weight. People everywhere felt something shift in their hearts. Here was a boy who had lived in silence, yet he became the bridge between pain and hope. Many viewers cried. Some wiped tears from their eyes. Parents hugged their children tighter. Teachers talked about the power of listening and the strength of speaking out. Sefu's courage showed everyone that even those who seem weak can change the world. He wasn't just a servant or a silent helper anymore. He was a hero, a symbol of bravery, and a voice for the voiceless. After the interview, messages flooded social media. People shared his words, calling him the voice of Mbeko and praising his quiet strength. Sefu never planned to be famous. He only wanted to help a friend in need, but his courage gave hope to thousands, proving that sometimes the smallest voice can roar the loudest. And for Adama, hearing Sefu speak was the greatest gift she could ever receive, a reminder that she was never alone, that her story mattered, and that freedom could come in the most unexpected ways. After everything she had been through, something incredible happened to Adama. The president's wife heard her story and was deeply moved. She offered Adama a scholarship to study at one of the best schools in the country. For the first time in her life, Adama felt hope that went beyond the walls of the chief's mansion and the dusty streets of Mbeko. At school, Adama worked harder than ever. Every book she opened was a step away from the past and a step closer to her dreams. But she never forgot where she came from, or the girls who were still trapped like she once was. So, when she graduated, Adama started a foundation called Voices of Mbeko. It wasn't just her story anymore. It was the story of every child forced into marriage, every girl silenced by fear. The foundation gave girls a place to speak, to learn, and to fight for their freedom. Adama traveled across the country, sharing her message with courage and strength. She met with leaders, teachers, and families, reminding them that every child deserves a childhood, not chains. Meanwhile, far away in a cold prison cell, Judea watched the television. She saw Adama standing tall, speaking in front of crowds, changing lives. The woman who once sold her stepdaughter for gold now sat alone, filled with bitter regret. Every word Adama spoke was a reminder of the price Judea paid, not just in law, but in shame and loss. Adama's story was no longer one of pain and silence. It was a story of power and purpose. She had turned her darkest moment into a light for others to follow. And as Voices of Mbeko grew stronger, so did the hope that no child would ever be sold or silenced again. Adama had gone from being sold to becoming a savior, a true hero for her village, and for every girl who dared to dream. Years had passed since Adama left Mbeko as a scared girl trapped by lies. Now, she walked back into the village, not with anger or bitterness, but with a heart full of hope and a mission. The dusty road she once knew was lined with curious faces. Men, women, and children gathered quietly, watching as she stepped off a bright yellow school bus. Behind her were stacks of books, new desks, and clean water tanks, gifts she had brought to change their lives. The village elders and many villagers dropped to their knees, overwhelmed by the woman standing before them. They saw not the girl they once ignored, but a strong, brave woman who had fought for justice and returned to heal her home. Adama looked at them with calm eyes. Her voice was steady and clear as she spoke. "You sold me for gold," she said, "but I came back with purpose." Those words echoed through the village like a promise. She wasn't there for revenge or hate. She was there to build a future where no child would be sold, no voice would be silenced, and no dreams would be stolen. She opened the doors to the new school and invited the children inside. The water tanks promised clean water for the whole village, a simple gift with life-changing power. Adama's return was more than a homecoming. It was a new beginning. The girl who had once been trapped in silk and silence had come back as a leader, a savior, and a symbol of hope for everyone. And as the sun set over Mbeko, the village knew one thing for sure. Their story had changed forever.